grandfather was one of 6 brothers. And I suppose they went to the States because there was no work to be found anywhere else.
Just below the feeling of consciousness is a feeling that there's an affiliation, a strong tie back to the land of, literally, of our fathers. We've perpetuated many of the old traditions in the Welsh.
When the mills were started, they sent to England for all the people to come over. And that's why there were so many people here from Lancashire and Keighley working in those mills.
To really give us children, 3 of us, an opportunity in this great, fantastic United States, as he was told about, you see, which wasn't quite so fantastic, let me tell you, when we came here.
The engine houses and mine chimneys of this Cornish landscape are silent now. In the 1800s, the noise they made rang across the county from the Atlantic to the English Channel. In the early 1800s, Cornwall produced 2/3 of the world's copper, and much of its tin. Conditions underground were appalling. The foul air and thick dust ate into the miner's body and destroyed his health.
I don't think very many of them lived long lives. My father made 69, but I'm sure that my mother's 2 brothers, one probably went to 35 and the other just over 40. It was quite commonplace to be at school with youngsters whose dads had died at a very young age. I recollect early one morning being with my father. He was going picking mushrooms. He was unemployed and there was no unemployment benefit for him. And we happened to meet an old friend of his who left the mines. Well, while he was talking to my father, he had a fit of coughing. And being only a kid of about 10, 11, I remember I was horrified to see a pool of blood. Perhaps that's exaggerating it, but blood on the ground. He spat it up. It took him minutes before he'd recovered sufficiently, and then he drove off with his pony and trap. Well, I knew another neighbor who was next door to me. He had to leave them
short. That was a Cornish miner's life in the last century. By 1900, nearly 1/3 of Cornwall's population had emigrated. Yet only 40 years earlier, there had been nearly 400 mines working in Cornwall.
I think about 1830, there were about 30,000 people employed in the mines of Cornwall, either directly or indirectly. In fact, it was the lifeblood of the county in those days. First of all, you've got the recurring booms and slumps of trade generally, right throughout the Victorian era, which I would say have been more extreme than in our own lifetime, the inevitable booms and slumps which affected metal prices. And then, of course, you must realize this, that a mine, unlike most other industries, well, a mine is like a human being. When it's born, it's going to die, and every mine does that. wages tended to be very low, and the industry, with this continual series of booms and slumps, had got down into a poor economic position and couldn't afford very much in the way of wages. And the result was that even when we weren't in the middle of a depression, miners said, well, there's big money to be made in Australia or in America, or at any rate there are glowing stories coming home of the possibilities. We'll have a go at it. And so men emigrated. I know of a small country church which had about 30 members, and I believe they lost somewhere about 8 or 9 men in that little community within 12 months. I think it was about 1909, attracted by the then brilliant prospects in the United States. So it only shows how it affected the county in every way.
If they made money enough, of course, their aim was, in the majority of cases, was to come home and settle down. They didn't need a great pile of money like they do today, you see, because a man came home with £2,000 and he was fixed. He was fixed for life at that time. So his money was 2.5%. And all you had was £2,050 a year. Well, that's all you would have if you was a mechanic here working, you see, at full wage. £1 a week. So that if you could get £1 a week coming in for doing nothing, you were a gentleman.
The miners of Cornwall left the county in their thousands. Some went for a short season to America and returned with enough money to buy a plot of land in the home country. Others settled in the new mining towns of California, Colorado, Michigan, and Wisconsin. They were the best hard rock miners in the world.
All the Cornish miners who went out to the States, and of course there were many thousands, they were all known as Cousin Jacks. The Americans called them that. They liked calling them Cousin Jacks.
A cousin Jack wasn't always a cousin. He was just another Cornishman who'd come to America.
Whenever men were looking for employment, they went to the mines, and someone from in the office would step outside and invite the Cousin Jacks to put up their hands, and then he would suggest they stepped and made a line to one side. They were the first to go in and get employment. I suppose it was accepted that they knew something about mining.
The Cousin Jack network began in southern Wisconsin, when the first Cornish immigrants came here in the 1830s to work the lead mines.
We're the land of the Cousin Jacks here in Linden. Yes, almost everybody in town was Cousin Jack. In fact, I think the majority of the people living here today are of Cornish ancestry.
They were told that there were riches here. The Cornish, of course, this goes back to the Cornish storytelling, I think. The ones who came first wrote letters home and told how well they were doing and how easy it was to make money. They were told that lead lay on the surface of the ground here, which it did in some places. And the idea that ore, which they were going so deep to find in Cornwall, was strewn over the ground was a fascinating idea to the Cornish miner. Of course, it looked like, well, really easy wealth. And they came in anticipation of wealth, and very few of them found it.
The men came first, leaving their families in Cornwall. One of the women left behind was Lily and Harry's grandmother.
Her husband was in America. He wasn't sending her any money. She had 3 children, and she went to Penzance to work as a cook. She came home once a week to see the children on a Sunday afternoon, have tea with her mother. She would leave Penzance at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, walk home, and be back again at 10 o'clock in the evening. She decided to go to America, and I think her brother must have financed her. He was already there. And she packed up and took the 3 children with her. My grandmother arrived in Denver. She was met by her brother. She immediately said, "Where is Will?" Her brother said, "Oh, you'll be all right, Mary." She said, "Is he sick?" "You'll be all right, Mary. Is he dead?" Apparently he had been buried the day before. He died mountain fever. Of course, he took her to Nevadaville, and the miners there built her a log cabin. She took in 24 men and washed and baked for them. She said that from the time she put her foot into the country, she washed and baked for 24 men. She got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and went to bed at 12 at night.
Died he for me who caused his pain.
In America, Methodist hymns sang out over Colorado and Wisconsin, as they did in Cornish villages like St. Agnes and Pendeen.
Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me? Amazing love, how can it be that thou, my God, shouldst die for me? Long my imprisonment.
In Wisconsin, there was an alternative to mining. The land was cheap and good, and the Cornish could always turn to farming. Some of them have married into other immigrant groups, but they still remember Cornwall.
It's where we came from and why we are here, and it gives us a sense of stability, this neighborhood thing, the fact that the neighbors are related and have the same roots. We feel a sense of oneness in our neighborhood. Maybe it's still the Cousin Jack feeling, because we still have it. There's a strong feeling of family and cousinship among the Cornish in this area. I remember an uncle of my husband, my first husband's, fussing one time about neighborhood was purely getting ruined. All these good Cornish girls were marrying Germans, and it was just ruining the neighborhood. So, but I don't think it's that serious a situation.
The Cornish, they could sing without the knowledge of notes. Somebody pitch a tune and they'd all sing. And on the way home from the mine, they walked, of course, in those days, and they do quite a little singing. Most of them went to the Methodist church, and of course they went to church a lot because there, as Dad says, there wasn't much else to go to, so they always went to church, maybe about 3 times a day on Sunday. And the ore was mostly taken to Galena, and they took it by oxen. They would bring back groceries for the local store, and usually a barrel of whiskey. And he said for some reason or other that barrel of whiskey got tapped on the way home.
They were related when they came. There was intermarriage in Cornwall, as we have checked the records. And then when they got to this country, they lived in a tight-knit little group and very definitely intermarried. I have found instances in the Rule family of double first cousins marrying. So there was a lot of intermarriage. Well, it's to the point now where this neighborhood is, they say that you're either a Rule or a Jewel, or your wife was, or your mother was. And this is literally true.
They were a bit rough. I think most of them, when they got home from the mine, they always went what they called the saloon in those days. And they'd bring their dinner pail home, a full beer. It was well, you've seen the buckets that they carried to the mine and had a little place in the top for the pasty. No, a place at the bottom for the pasty and a place in the top for the coffee. But that was empty again. They came home, so that was full beer. Then after supper, usually they went back uptown for a while.
Well, I think that we were always very proud of our Cornish heritage. I remember when I went to school that we called our basketball teams the Cornish Miners, and our school annual was the Cornish Miners. And then we had a little song we used to sing when we'd want to cheer our boys on. Would you like to hear it? Okay. Oh, when you hear the roll of the linden drum, then you will know that the Cornish have come, for the Cornish company is the best company that ever come over from the old country.
Dreamt of old England and faces I knew. And I listened with joy as I did when a boy at the sound of the old village bells, as the church bells. I believe that's about all that I remember of that one, but I've heard it sung many, many times, even by people, Cornish people in California. I've heard them just humming and singing that tune for many times. I think that most children of Cornish people that were born in America wanted to come back here to have a visit. That seemed to be a great attraction, come back to the old country and visit it. I've got a niece. She comes over here nearly every year. She likes it here better than she does in California. And she's an American girl. She isn't Cornish.
The men from the Welsh valleys, like the Cornish, had skills to offer America. After 1850, the rapid growth of the United States created a demand for miners, quarrymen, iron and steel workers. The Welsh were the men for these jobs.
I'm an American first, but I still deeply revere my ties with the Principality of Wales, and I want to keep in my family an awareness of that which Wales gave us, although none of us in my generation were born in Wales.
Most Welsh went to Pennsylvania and settled in the mining areas around Wilkes-Barre.
When I was a boy, I went to a church where the services were conducted entirely in Welsh. As a result, I had to learn, as did all the youngsters in the church, the language. The Welsh came over, and they brought with them their skill as coal miners, and naturally gravitated to the place where there was anthracite or hard coal with which they'd been used to dealing. As a result, why, most of the mine bosses and mine owners were Welsh, because if there were X jobs open, and there were 10 candidates who were Welsh and 10 who were Irish, what I've read and learned of those days, the Welsh received the preference.
Hard-working miners, their dangers are great, and many while working have met their sad fate. They're doing their duty as all miners do. Shut out from the daylight and dawning ones too.
My grandfather came in the early 1860s. Became a coal miner, later superintendent of the colliery. He had 6 children, 5 boys and a girl. My father was number 3 boy. He became district attorney of Luzerne County, with northeastern Pennsylvania, and he went on the bench then. He was a judge up there, later president judge of that county, for approximately 23 years. My grandfather came here because the village And the area in which he lived apparently offered two sources of employment. One was the coal mine, or the lead mine, and the other was that of a shepherd. The lead mines ran out. And as a result, he was faced with the choice of being a shepherd. Apparently didn't want to be, so he came to America. It's as simple as that.
There were strikes in the Bethesda quarry and there wasn't any work. So naturally, when there wasn't any work, there was no money. And my mother used to say, her grandmother used to say, after feeding them, she used to say, "Thank God I fed them once again."
My grandfather, he certainly was working at the age of 12, according to the census return of 1861, where he's recorded as being 12 years old and a slate quarryman. He was already at that age, working presumably in the Penryn quarry.
The young men, they just got out. My grandfather was a young man coming to this country. My mother's uncle was a young man coming to this country. They came about between 1850 and 1865. That was when they came. Oh, happy people don't migrate. They don't leave their homes.
Skilled, Protestant and British, the Welsh fitted easily into American society. They did well in their new land.
There has been rather a gap or a change, I suppose, in social mobility in 3 generations in America between my grandfather, who came over as a slate quarryman, and then my father, who did work his way through college and got a professional degree. He was a civil engineer, actually worked as a land surveyor, and achieved what would be called middle-class status in a suburb of New York City. And then I, as the next generation, who not only went to college, but was able to go on to graduate school, get a PhD, and ended up in university teaching. But my father told me that he had a brief but somewhat vivid experience in slate quarrying, that as a boy he did go to work in a slate quarry, I suppose one summer, and next thing he knew, he found himself somehow on a crane which had swung out over the open quarry, a rather terrifying experience, and everybody was on the edge of the quarry was yelling to him, "Hold on, Dick, hold on!" And my father told me it had never occurred to him to do anything else, but he did make up his mind right then and there that if he ever got back safely, he would never work in a slate quarry again another day of his life, and he did not.
The Germans were in Slatington section. They were farmers, and if they saw the slate, they didn't know what to do with it. So it wasn't until the Welshmen came that the quarries were worked. And coming from the slate sections of Wales, they knew all about slate. Most people would never think of a piece of slate. It would mean a thing to them. Sort of a part of my heritage, let's put it that way.
Well, this may very much arouse certain Welsh patriots, but it seemed to me that the Welsh as a group were very quickly assimilated into the dominant, if you want to say WASP community, Anglo-Saxon community, and the contributions that they made were because of their individual ability and not because they were of any particular Welsh background as such.
They brought with them their music, and Welsh music, although funereal in tone, is a beautiful music. Also brought a sense of humor, also brought a group who too often rush into things, not even on a calculated risk. And some of them were very successful in doing it. They also brought with them a sense of discipline, developed in the Welsh households in the Principality of Wales, which has helped their children and grandchildren and so forth, and by example, other households.
There isn't a typical American. There is no such thing. You have an ethnic background of some sort. The only real Americans are the Indians. American Indians.